Hey, um, hi. This is a new series with short videos. They're tutorials, you know. Hopefully that's still kind of interesting, and it gets you to think about the stuff. Right. Okay. I feel like at this point you know I love basing and I love Milliput. I was making some funky little bases for my Frostgrave campaign and binging a bunch of videos in the background. I was left a little unsatisfied. I didn't really see a lot of what I love about basing in there. So yeah, here's the video that I wish was actually out there. Alright, this is the simplest one, and the one I'm using for my Turnip28 army. I start with some Milliput rocks, you know, nice and rounded. After that's cured, I throw on a thin layer of uneven Milliput all over the base, making sure to leave some of the rocks poking out from underneath. That's gonna be our ground level. I put some big roots with snakes of putty with a bit of branching for visual interest. The next step is making some small leaves. I sculpt them out of a dot of Milliput with just my needle tool. So I'm using Milliput mostly in this video, and in this base specifically I'm not doing any texturing. At the scale our models are at, there tends to be, you know, a healthy amount of stylization in the sculpts. And I think it's interesting to match that same level of stylization on the sculpted bases as well. You know, there's nothing wrong with textures and tufts and paper leaves, but for this experiment, I've been inspired by games like Animal Crossing or The Witness. I like the texture in those games. The bulk of the vegetation here is going to be actually like painted on the base. You can add some bigger details to the hero bases, like some stacked bricks to evoke a ruin, or just a big stump. You know, these are really easy shapes to sculpt. Okay, painting time. It's been a while. I primed the whole thing black, then it's time to stipple on some color. For the purpose of this tutorial, here are the exact colors I'm using. But really, mix a good spectre from any browns, yellows and reds and you'll be set. I start with my darkest color, dried bark, then move up to a lighter mix made from this base and something else on the palette. With each step I cover progressively less of an area, going at it with mixes of Mordheim brown and Mephiston red, until I'm only really dotting a few select spots with Iriel yellow. This process isn't a straight line, so feel free to go back and forth until you like the result. Then it's time for the details. I just throw my dark brown on the roots and highlight them real quick. I do the rocks with a simple mix of my brown and dawnstone, and then paint the leaves with Deathguard green, just leaving some of the oranges from the base showing underneath. And that is base number 1. These are the aforementioned Frostgrave bases, but you could use the same principles for a game like Mordheim, just without the snow. This scheme takes a little bit of patience, but I think it's worth it. With just a bit of putty, I make one cobblestone. These are going to be very square, because I like to think that Frostgrave had some good stonemasons. Then I make another. You should let the quantity of putty you grab be slightly different each time, so that when you make a stone that's about the same dimensions, it'll be slightly higher or lower, creating some interesting variations. The tool marks that your clay-shaped reliefs could be sanded away in the end, but to be honest, I kind of like them. It makes the stones feel like they were actually cut by an artisan. Here's a pattern with much smaller cobblestones on this 32mm base, because it's more interesting to have varied cobble sizes and patterns. As I sculpt these bases, I want to make sure to leave some of the blocks off, indicating that there's been wear and damage. For that same reason, I can carve some dings and cracks into my Milliput. On this larger base, I'm going to do a little curb, taking 2 big putty cylinders and squaring them off on the base. Once I'm happy with the curb shape, I take my needle tool and exaggerate some of the shapes that the Milliput formed when I smoothed it. These will define the cobbles that form the pavement. Now let's talk about the edge of that base. You can go one of 2 ways. On this big one, The pavement cuts off at the edges, kind of like a street photograph. We're implying that there's more to the scene that we're not seeing. It's calling to a piece of context that we don't really get. Kind of like how a film director would play with off-screen elements. And that's really what a base is. It's a way to frame your miniatures. And calling two elements out of frame can be a powerful way to compose a base. For example, here on my bear base, I've got kind of like a dryad hand going off the edge of the base. Did the bear crush the dryad? Is it reanimating? Is it creeping towards it? Just that little bit of intrigue is a very simple example of what you can do with this principle. On the other hand, I've gone with a much more insular design here. The mini will sit on a pile of stones in the middle of the base, and the edge just sort of fades away into a featureless landscape. The scene is more isolated, which also means it's standing on its own. That detachment from a wider setting is also an interesting idea to play with, in my opinion. We're obviously in a less realistic kind of composition here, but there's something I quite like about that loneliness. And you know, it's still a play with the edge of the base. Is the empty base edge restricting the figure, or is it bursting out of its apparent constraints? So what I read as loneliness could be turned into a ton of different emotions depending on what you're putting on the base and how you're sculpting it. Hopefully that gives you some ideas to ponder. I like throwing a few weird pillars and standing stones on my bases. It feels appropriate for a magical city. You could also make some little idols like I did with my Necron bases. On this one I'm doing a big ice spike that broke the tiles, like some kind of old vestige from a magical duel probably. It could also be a chunk of weird stone if you're making these for Mordheim. The effect really starts looking good once the putty's hard and I can whittle it into a faceted shape. I'm adding a couple of candles, using 2 different sizes of plastic art rods and making the melted wax with PVA and the wick with steel wire. Then on the uncovered areas I'm using a mix of PVA and baking soda as an improvised texture paste that is going to be still pretty thin. The paint scheme for the rocks here just doesn't matter at all. Just go with something that matches the board or contrasts nicely with the mini you're putting on it. Once the paint is dry, I take some of these winter tufts and I glue them on with PVA. With a little bit of dark wash that matches my shadow color, I carefully shade the bottom of the tufts. Then it's time for the secret good stuff. This is a dry pastel from Sennelier. By the way, Sennelier, I love your product. Please, I will say anything you like. Send me some stuff, please. They come in a ton of different colors and they're very good if you want to draw with them. I'm going to crush a little bit of it to use as a pigment powder. This really fine powder is going to give us the look of a snow-swept landscape, and if we apply it to a mini, it'll look nice and cold as well. For the snow effect, there are a bunch out there. Just use like whichever product you have on hand or whichever you like the best. Inevitably, since that product will be blended with water, it will have washed some of the pigment away. So once the snow effect is dry, I apply more pigment, and if this was going to be a gaming base, I would fix it with alcohol. And that's the second basing scheme finished. Yes, I am going back to that well again, thank you. But this time I'm putting an extra spin on it. This is a little ammonite fossil that I've cast using Oyumaru. I got a bunch of these from an old set of fossils that I got on the cheap at a garage sale. Casting bits and using them as base toppers is a very versatile and fun technique. This is a coastal scene, but if you pick up anything cool on the street or at the thrift store or on a hike, you'll often have a wonderful centerpiece for a scenic base. Once I've blended my fossil into the base with Milliput, I can start adding details. You can watch my Shield Slam video for a variant of this base where I go in depth about other details that I'm not going to cover here. I like pebble beaches. It's just more fun to swim at. So I make a bunch of Milliput pebbles and pile them up for a nice little effect. Next I make some of these like worm tubes that you see on shells, and I leave a little round hole at the end of each one. Then for the proper rock pool fauna, I'm going to do some barnacles like you've seen before, and an anemone out of green stuff. It's like a super easy sculpt. I take a ball of putty and shape it into a kind of stubby cylinder. I press it into the space I want the anemone to be at, and then on top of that I had a bunch of tiny green stuff rods that I've rolled into shape. Oh, you guys are really getting like a triple dose of painting this video. You could really go like a ton of different ways with the colors here, because the seaside is a very rich and diverse environment. Even though the bases we're building are very stylized, using reference is super useful. So when you go at rock pooling, take a look at the colors and see how they change at different times of day. Rocks can be, you know, pink, green, brown, white. So once you have a color you like, you just go wild with it, you know. Just please make sure to not paint everything gray. Once all of it is set, I come in with some UV resin to do a quick water effect. And that is our third base. Feels nice writing and shooting a quick video every once in a while, especially after that 30-minute behemoth that I put out last time. As usual, thank you for watching. Let me know if you liked that little tutorial format. I've got a couple plans for the next episode of this series to, you know, explore the opposite side of the stylization spectrum. But if you want me to tackle specific basing schemes, I want to hear that. If the one you suggest like inspires me, it actually might end up being covered in a future episode. I'll also take like any comments about, I don't know, your favorite banana-based dessert or anything. I basically want you to interact with the buttons in this video, you know. Anyway, I'll see ya in the next video where I make a life-size model of the Zardoz head.